Hey everybody, welcome back to World History. We're doing section 3 today, and this is our final section of the notes, so your notes are due at the end of this video. So today we're going to be looking at how the Enlightenment affected the United States, or what would become the United States. Hold on, just a second. So, sorry about that. By the 1700s, Britain had a greater ability to trade due to its location, colonies, and imposed fewer restrictions on trade. If you remember from chapter 15, they had won previous European conflicts here in the Americas, the French and Indian War being one of them. They also held a monopoly on the slave trade in Spanish America. And in the 1600s, they'll take control of Ireland and then Scotland and Wales in 1701, becoming the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Okay, so jumping ahead a little bit, George III, when he comes to the throne, is going to be eager to recover the powers of the crown. He's going to work to end Whig domination, that's one of the major political parties, choose his own ministers, dissolve the cabinet system, and make Parliament follow his will, mainly because at this point, Parliament had really been going through this phase of truly trying to impose restrictions on what the King of England could do. George didn't like that. He wanted all of his power back, and we're really going to see that in how he reacts to various events. So, a little bit on the colonies. So, a lot of today is going to be like American history stuff that you should already be familiar with. So, by the 1750s, the English colonies in North America were thriving. They were busy commercial centers in cities like New York and Boston, and colonial shipyards produced many vessels for the British fleet. Mercantilism was strong here in an attempt to strengthen its own economy by exporting more than importing. Parliament's also going to pass the Navigation Acts to regulate colonial trade and manufacturing, but just like every other British policy they tried to enforce on the colonies, wasn't rigorously enforced, and smuggling was pretty common. The colonies were also home to diverse religious and ethnic groups. Social distinctions were more blurred, and colonists felt entitled to the rights of English citizens, even though they didn't live in England, but they were still a part of the British Empire. They should have been given the same rights and representation as people that lived in jolly old England. So, if you remember from chapter 15, the 7 Years' War and the French and Indian War had drained the British treasury. They were broke. And King George wanted the colonists to pay for the war, since it had primarily been fought over here. So Parliament's going to pass the Sugar Act in 1764 and the Stamp Act in 1765. Both added taxes to everyday goods used in the colonies. Colonists protested this since they didn't have a say in the taxes. This is taxation without representation. Eventually, the Stamp Act will be repealed in 1766. But then Parliament, at the behest of King George, is going to pass the Declaratory Act, stating that they had complete authority over the colonists, even though they had no representation in Parliament at all. So eventually, the colonists are going to be like, you know what, we're done with this, we're going to rebel. And in March of 1770, we have the Boston Massacre. British troops are going to kill 5 colonists after being pelted with stones and snowballs. Again, y'all know this. In 1773, we also have the Boston Tea Party, which protested British taxes on tea. In response, Parliament's going to pass harsh laws to punish Massachusetts specifically. Then we have the First Continental Congress form in Philadelphia to discuss the situation. It included people like John Adams, a lawyer from Massachusetts, and George Washington, a farmer from Virginia. Now, eventually, the colonists are going to declare independence. And the big thing to remember here is that in April of 1775, there's going to be battles at Lexington and Concord. The Continental Army is then going to form under Washington's command, and the Second Continental Congress is going to form. They're going to vote to declare independence. Thomas Jefferson of Virginia was the primary author of the Declaration, and the big thing I need you to remember here with the Declaration is that it reflects Locke's ideas of government to protect natural rights, life, liberty, and property. It also includes Locke's idea that the people had the right to alter or to abolish unjust governments. Excuse me. Popular sovereignty is also going to play a role by saying all power comes from the people. The Declaration of Independence is going to be adopted and shared on July 4th of 1776, declaring the colony's independence from Britain. So, at first, the American Revolution, the cause looked pretty bleak. The British outnumbered the Continental Army with more trained soldiers, a huge fleet of ships, and a mass amount of resources. But the Americans did have some advantages. They knew the land, they had strong leaders like George Washington, and they were determined to fight. After the British defeated the Battle of Saratoga, the French were persuaded to join the conflict on the side of the Americans. This is where like Marquis de Lafayette comes into play. Eventually, the war would end after the British were defeated at the Battle of Yorktown. The war would be ended with the Treaty of Paris. So, the United States is now independent. So now what? Well, let me move my bubble so you can actually see the rest of that stuff. After the American Revolution, the Continental Congress established the Articles of Confederation. This is the first form of government. This document was extremely weak compared to the Constitution. It didn't allow the federal government to collect taxes. There was no executive or judicial branch. And each state only got one vote, regardless of their population. Eventually, leaders are going to gather in Philadelphia to write the Constitution. What was originally going to be a revising of the Articles of Confederation, they just decided to throw the whole thing out and start over. Among them were people like George Washington, James Madison, and Benjamin Franklin. Madison especially is going to keep very detailed notebooks about the writing of the Constitution. The framers of the Constitution were heavily influenced by the Enlightenment, especially Baron de Montesquieu. The Constitution created a federal republic with power divided between the federal and state governments, along with those three branches of government. A little bit more on some famous leaders. Again, famous faces, including Benjamin Franklin, a philosopher, scientist, and legislator from Philadelphia; Washington, general of the Continental Army and lawyer from Virginia; and John Adams, a lawyer from Massachusetts. Now, a big thing in the Constitution was the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution that recognized the idea of the people having basic rights that the government must protect. The Bill of Rights and the Constitution have endured more than 200 years later and are still important today to the foundations of American government. The Constitution has also become a symbol of freedom and inspired other countries to revolt against the European powers. In 1789, a revolution in France is going to overthrow the monarchy in the name of liberty and equality. And within the coming years, other Europeans are going to take up the cry for freedom as well. We'll talk about the French Revolution next chapter, and we'll talk about some more of those revolutions when we come back in second semester. So again, here's your Bill of Rights. Again, these are basic rights that all Americans have. So like First Amendment, right to free speech, press, assembly, religion, and petition of government. I will let you guys know now, you need to know all 10 of these for your test. That is the next class period. All right, that is it for the notes for today. I'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.